The moment I stepped into that sleek downtown office for my new job, it felt like stepping into another world. A world where I wasn't just Tom's wife, stuck in the endlessly repeating cycle of daily routines. That's when I met Alan. Alan, with his easy smile and charm that seemed to light up the room, stationed right next to me. It didn't take long for those accidental brushes and shared glances to turn into something more. Something exciting. Lunches with Alan became the highlight of my day. We'd sneak out to this cozy little bistro tucked away from the prying eyes of our coworkers. Sitting across from him, laughing over a glass of wine, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. It was like we were in our little bubble, far removed from the reality of my life outside those office walls. 3 months flew by in a blur of stolen moments and whispered promises. Then came the team dinner that changed everything. It was one of those nights where the air was just right, and the city lights blurred into the background. As we walked to our cars, parked side by side in the dimly lit lot, Alan stopped me with a look. Before I knew it, his lips were on mine. It was a kiss full of everything unsaid between us, a moment of weakness, of wanting, that I didn't even try to resist. The next day, guilt gnawed at me, but the thrill of the kiss lingered. I started a separate email just for Alan, a secret channel for our growing connection. Each message felt like a tiny rebellion, a step further away from my life with Tom. Tom, my husband, who had become more of a roommate than a partner over the years. We fought about it one night, the lack of connection between us. I blamed the distance, the silence that had settled over us, but deep down, I knew I was the one pulling away, inching closer to Alan with every shared secret, every laugh, every look. On my birthday, Alan gave me a necklace, a delicate chain with a single, shimmering stone that seemed to hold all the words we couldn't say to each other. I hid it in the back of my sock drawer, wearing it only on those days I knew I'd see him. It became my talisman, a symbol of this double life I was leading. Sarah, my best friend since college, was the first to notice. "That's beautiful. Where did you get it?" she asked one day, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Panic flared up in me, but I lied smoothly. "Oh, this old thing. Found it in my collection. Must have been there for ages." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push further. I could tell, though, that she knew something was off. The lie sat between us, a barrier that hadn't been there before. Each of these actions, these decisions, felt like stepping stones on a path I never intended to take. A path that led me away from the life I had built with Tom, into the arms of another man. A path that, once taken, could never be undone. Right when I thought things couldn't get more tangled, Tom threw me a curveball, a surprise weekend getaway. "We need this," he said, his eyes searching mine for a spark that had dimmed years ago. Guilt gnawed at me as I packed my bag, the weight of my secret affair making each step towards our car feel like walking through quicksand. The getaway was picturesque, the kind of scene you'd see on a postcard. Tom tried, he really did. Candlelit dinners, walks along the beach, his hand always reaching for mine. But my mind was miles away, with Alan. I played along, laughing at Tom's jokes, but inside, I was distant, my heart tangled in a web I'd spun myself. Then came the moment that nearly unraveled everything. As Tom rummaged through my purse for the car keys, he found the receipt. A hotel in the city, dates that didn't align with any work event I'd mentioned. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up. Panic surged through me, but I lied through my teeth. "Oh, that was for a work thing. Must have forgotten to submit it for reimbursement." He looked at me, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but let it go. The guilt didn't stop me, though. Alan and I planned our own escape, a secluded cabin where whispers of love and promises filled the space between us. It was a weekend of stolen bliss, a world where only we existed. But every stolen moment had its price. One night, back in the reality of my marriage, I slipped. "Good night, Alan," I murmured to Tom, the name hanging in the air between us. I saw his confusion, the hurt flash across his face before I could backtrack. "Tom. Sorry. Just tired and stressed from work." But the seed of doubt was planted, watered by my guilt. Tom's questions became more frequent, his gaze more probing. "Who were you with at lunch today? How's Alan?" Each question a needle pricking at the balloon of lies I'd inflated around us. In a desperate bid to keep my affair hidden, I bought a second phone. A secret lifeline to Alan, tucked away in the glove compartment of my car. It felt like I was living in a spy novel, except the thrill was tainted by the reality of my duplicity. The facade started to crack at a work party. Tom noticed. How could he not? The way Alan and I laughed a little too loudly at each other's jokes, the stolen glances. On the ride home, he asked, "Something going on between you two?" I brushed it off with a laugh. "It's just friendly banter, Tom. You know how it is at work." But Sarah saw through me. "You're playing with fire," she warned one evening, her voice tight with concern. "You think I don't understand, but I do. And I'm telling you, it's going to end badly." I shrugged her off. "You worry too much, Sarah. It's under control." Yet, deep down, I knew she was right. I was walking a tightrope, and it was only a matter of time before I fell. Just when I thought things couldn't get any messier, Alan's wife called me out of the blue. Her voice was icy, accusing me of wrecking her marriage. I tried to sound confused, denying everything, but my heart was racing. "You've got it all wrong," I stammered, but she hung up without believing a word. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning, dreading what was coming next. The next bomb dropped when Tom, rummaging through my car for his wallet, found the second phone. The look on his face when he confronted me with it was something I'll never forget. "What's this?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I felt cornered, the weight of my lies heavy on my chest. It's not what you think," I started, but the truth spilled out in a desperate stream. I confessed to the affair but tried to downplay it, begging for his forgiveness. Tom's reaction was a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. He didn't say much, just that he needed time to think, and then he was gone. The silence of the house after he left was deafening. I felt both relief and utter despair, the reality of what I'd done, and what I was about to lose, sinking in. The next day, Alan called to end things. "I need to fix my marriage," he said, his voice firm. Just like that, I was left alone, betrayed by the man for whom I'd risked everything. The emptiness was overwhelming. When Tom finally broke the silence, it was to demand a divorce. His tone was cold, final. There was no room for discussion, no chance of reconciliation. The man I'd shared my life with, the father of my children, was now a stranger. My friends, the few I thought I could count on, sided with Tom. Even Sarah, who'd been my rock through thick and thin, turned her back on me. "I can't support you in this," she said, her voice laced with disappointment. The isolation was suffocating. The letter from Tom's lawyer arrived, outlining the divorce terms. He was seeking full custody of our kids, citing my affair as the reason. Reading those words, seeing my failings spelled out so coldly, broke me. The life I knew, the family I loved, was crumbling around me, and it was all my fault. The consequences of my actions were now impossible to ignore. I'd destroyed my marriage, alienated my friends, and jeopardized my relationship with my children, all for an affair that ended in betrayal. The weight of my choices pressed down on me, a burden I'd carry long after the divorce papers were signed. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. After everything that went down, I reached out to Alan, desperate for some kind of support, or maybe just for someone to tell me that I wasn't the world's worst person. But that was a dead end. My call didn't even ring once before it went straight to voicemail. Later, I saw it. My number was blocked. Alan had cut all ties, leaving me to drown in the mess I'd made, alone. The divorce proceedings started not long after. It felt like being on trial, with every email, every text I'd ever sent to Alan paraded in front of me, painting a picture I could no longer deny. There I was, the villain in my own story. It's one thing to know you've screwed up. It's another to have it laid bare for a room full of strangers to judge. My relationship with Tom's family, which had once been so warm and welcoming, turned ice cold overnight. They cut off all communication, siding with Tom. I couldn't blame them. In their eyes, I was the one who had torn their family apart. The loss of that support network was a blow I hadn't anticipated, leaving me feeling even more isolated. Work turned into a battlefield. Whispers followed me down the hall, and sympathetic looks were replaced with cold shoulders. My performance suffered. How could it not? Every day felt like walking into a war zone, where I was the enemy. And then Tom took it public. A post on social media, vague enough not to name me but clear enough for everyone to know who and what it was about. It spread like wildfire, each share and comment a knife twisting deeper into my already battered reputation. Friends, acquaintances, even people I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly experts on my life and my mistakes. So, I moved out. Found myself a small, dingy apartment that felt as far away from my former life as possible. It was a physical manifestation of my fall from grace, tiny, cramped, and utterly devoid of the warmth and love I'd once taken for granted. The loneliness was suffocating, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. The final nail in the coffin came when the court granted Tom full custody of our children. The judge cited my affair and the so-called instability I'd brought into their lives. I was allowed supervised visits, but each one was a stark reminder of the consequences of my actions. Seeing my kids looking at me with confusion, hurt, and sometimes indifference was more punishing than any court sentence. Each step of this descent was a lesson in loss. From Alan's rejection to the public shaming, from the isolation at work to the supervised visits with my children, I was getting a masterclass in the consequences of selfishness. The hardest part wasn't losing the comfort of my marriage or the companionship of my friends. It was seeing the trust and love in my children's eyes replaced with something much colder. Life has a funny way of knocking you down when you least expect it, forcing you to face the music, even when it's the last tune you want to hear. After everything crumbled, I found myself standing at the crossroads of my own mess, clueless about where to head next. The therapy sessions and support groups became my new normal, a lifeline thrown at me in the storm I'd brewed myself. Sitting in those circles, sharing my story with strangers, the weight of my actions hit me like a freight train. It was no longer about what I lost but what I'd done. One day, I decided to take a long walk, needing to clear my head, and that's when I saw them. Tom and the kids, playing in the park, laughter floating in the air, untainted by the chaos I'd left in my wake. They seemed happy, genuinely happy, and the sight was both beautiful and agonizing. I stood there, hidden behind the trees, a spectator to the life I once had, a stark reminder of everything I'd thrown away. Job hunting turned into a nightmare real quick. Each interview started with hopeful prospects and ended with polite rejections. The subtext clear: my personal life scandal had preceded me. It was a small town, after all. Gossip traveled faster than light. My parents tried to be supportive, but disappointment was etched deep in their eyes. They were grieving the loss of what our family once represented, a unity now shattered by my selfishness. The online hate was relentless. Anonymous messages filled with venom, blaming me for breaking apart what they saw as an ideal family. Each message was a dagger, reminding me of the pain I'd caused, not just to Tom and the kids but to an entire community that once respected me. Selling the necklace Alan gave me felt like severing the last tie to a mistake that cost me everything. The money went straight to covering therapy bills, a small price to pay for a chance at redemption, however distant that might seem. During the supervised visits with my kids, the gap between us seemed to widen with each encounter. Gone were the days of warm hugs and laughter. Now, their gazes were cautious, their words measured, as if they were interacting with a stranger rather than their mother. It broke me, each visit a reminder of the bridge I'd burnt down, unsure if it could ever be rebuilt. Hearing about Tom's remarriage felt like the final nail in the coffin of our past. He'd moved on, building a new life with someone we both knew, someone who had been a friend. They were starting fresh, leaving the wreckage of our marriage behind. It was a harsh but necessary wake-up call, a realization that it was time for me to do the same, to move on, however impossible that seemed. This chapter of my life was filled with lessons learned the hard way, each day a battle against the guilt and the longing for forgiveness. But amidst the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance to start anew, to rebuild from the ashes of my own making. It was a long road ahead, but for the first time, I felt ready to take the first step, no matter how daunting it might be. Hitting rock bottom has a way of clearing the slate, doesn't it? That's what I told myself as I stood amidst a sea of job seekers at the local job fair, clutching a stack of resumes that felt more like a plea than a professional introduction. Each booth I approached, I could feel the weight of their stares, the whispers that followed me like a shadow. "That's her," they'd murmur, "the woman from the news." My notoriety had become my unwanted brand, a scarlet letter I wore despite my best efforts to shed it. The day I found my car vandalized, homewrecker, etched into the paintwork like a permanent judgment, was the day I realized that forgiveness was a luxury far out of my reach. It stung, a physical manifestation of the hate that had been directed at me online and in hushed whispers. Yet, it also served as a twisted form of closure. If the community had rendered its verdict, all that was left was for me to find a way to live with it. Receiving the final divorce decree felt surreal, like reading the last page of a book about someone else's life. Tom's terms were clear, cutting all ties, leaving no room for reconciliation or hope. It was the end, unequivocally so, And as I folded the papers, I felt a chapter of my life closing with a finality that left me breathless. Freelancing became my lifeline, the only way to piece together a semblance of professional dignity. It was work that could be done in the shadows, away from judging eyes and whispered condemnations. Yet, in that solitude, I found a strange kind of freedom, a space where I could start to rebuild, one word at a time. Reaching out to Alan was a mistake, a moment of weakness I regretted as soon as it was done. Learning he had moved on, quite literally, to another state with his wife was a cold shower of reality. There was no solace in the past, only lessons hard learned and best left behind. Writing became my solace, my therapy. I started a blog, pouring my heart and soul into posts that chronicled my journey from infidelity to the aftermath. The reactions were mixed, but each comment, whether kind or cruel, was a reminder that my story was out there, a cautionary tale for others. The moment my youngest child hugged me for the first time since the divorce was both the highest and lowest point of my year. In that embrace, I felt all the love I thought I'd lost, but also the full weight of the cost at which it came. It was a bittersweet reminder of what mattered most, and what I'd put at risk. The holidays were the hardest. The loneliness was tangible, my small apartment an echo chamber of memories and regrets. Yet, it was during these low moments that I found a new purpose. Volunteering at a local charity, I discovered redemption not through forgiveness from those I'd wronged, but in giving to those who had nothing to do with my past. It was a small step toward rebuilding, not just my life, but myself. Seeing Tom and his new wife at a mutual friend's wedding was a jolt back to reality. Our brief exchange of glances was a silent conversation filled with what was and what could never be again. The pain was still fresh, a reminder of the love we'd shared in the family we'd built, now just a chapter in a story that was moving on without me. Alone in my apartment, I reflected on the irrevocable loss my choices had caused. There was no redemption, no fairy tale ending to this story. Just the harsh reality of consequences faced in a future uncertain. Yet, in that solitude, I found a spark of hope, a belief that while some mistakes can't be undone, the future still held a page unwritten, a chance for a new story to be